I will start by creating a new project. Which will be running on Tomcat 8, which I have in this directory. And for this project I will be using JDK 1.8, which I have in this directory. And let me go ahead and create a new server. So Tomcat 8, and if we go to configure runtime environment, so this is where the server is, and the GRE I'm using is JDK 1.8. Now the server will be this Sketch app server, which I'll put in this package. And I'll annotate it as a server endpoint. So we'll access it with project name slash Sketch app server, and I will have two classes, one acting as a decoder, Sketch app message decoder, and the other acting as an encoder, which is Sketch app message encoder. So let's go ahead and create those two. And this is the message that will be exchanged between the client and the server, Sketch app message. And for a client, I'll have this class Sketch app client, which will be in this package. And I'll annotate it as a client endpoint with Sketch app message decoder as a decoder, and Sketch app message encoder as the encoder. And the GUI client will be JavaFX Sketch app, and let's go back to the encoder and decoder. So the encoder will implement the encoder.text, and by doing that I'm gonna add these methods. And the decoder will implement decoder.text, and by doing that we'll add these methods. Now JSON will be used to communicate between the client and the server, and I will be downloading it from here. And I'll go to web content, webinf, and the lib directory, and paste it here. Next, let me go ahead and build the JavaFX app on the client side. So we will extend from application, and by doing that we will add this method, the start method. And we'll have a main method that makes a call to launch, which will end up triggering a call to the start method. And in start we'll have a white VBox, and let me define a canvas up here. And I'll instantiate it over here. And the VBox will contain two HBoxes that we will obtain by calling two methods, getHbox1 and getHbox2, passing in the canvas instance. And let me define those two methods. So getHbox1, return null for now. And getHbox2. And I'll set the title of the stage to be this title, and that stage will have a scene which contains the VBox, which in turn contains those two HBoxes. And I'll prevent the window from being resized and then show it. Next, the getHbox1 method will return an HBox containing the canvas. So I'll instantiate an HBox and add the canvas to it and set its border color and return it. And the canvas will be handling two events, a mouse pressed event and the mouse dragged event. And let me pick up a graphics context from the canvas. And I'll set the sketch line width to be 5. And let me define this method, point sketch method, which I will be passing it the point to be sketched and the event type. And we have two type of events, mouse pressed and mouse dragged. So in mouse pressed, I'll call this point sketch method, passing in the point, a new point instance, which has e.getx and e.gety, the position of the mouse. And so we have mouse pressed, so I'll pass it mouse event dot mouse pressed. and I'll do the same thing for the mouse dragged, except for the mouse event I'll pass it mouse event dot mouse dragged for the event type. Now before coding the point sketch, let's go to get hbox2. So what it will contain is a color picker, which initially will have this color, and an erase button. And let's define the color over here. So I'll instantiate an hbox and set the spacing in it, and then add the button and the color picker to that hbox and return it. And we'll be handling two events, a button on action event and a color picker on action event. And let me pick up a graphics context over here, and for color picker set on action, I'll pick up the color from the color picker, and I'll set the color of the sketching to be that color, and we'll have two values for the erase button. So we'll have erase, and the other value will be sketch. So let's do else here. So in that case, I'll set the color to be white, and then set the stroke to be that color, the white color, and then make the color picker invisible, and then set the text of the button to be sketch, and then so erasing the line width would be 30, and set the cursor to be text. Otherwise, if the value of that button is sketch, then I'll pick up the color from the color picker and set it to be the stroke color, and then I'll set the color picker to be visible and change the text to be erase, and set the line width to be 5 for sketching, and then set the cursor to be the default cursor. So let's go up here and add those two. Now since this client will be communicating with the server about what is being sketched, so I'll have a sketch app message over here, and let's actually go ahead and code this one. Now sketch app message will contain the sketching information communicated from the client to the server. So it will contain the point to be sketched, and the color and the size. So for example, for erasing it's 30, for normal sketching it's 5, and the event type. And here we have two event types. A mouse pressed and a mouse dragged event. And I'll have get methods for each one of those fields, and they will be initialized with a constructor. So I'll have a constructor that takes in the point, the color, the size, and the event type. Now going back to the point sketch method, if the color is white, meaning we are erasing, then the sketch app message instance will have a size of 50, and the point and color and mouse event passed from here. Otherwise the size will be 5 and the same point, color, and mouse event. And I want to define a method that handles the message sketching. So let me first call it for message sketch, that I will be passing it the sketch app message instance. So here I'll check if it's a mouse pressed event, or a mouse dragged event. And let me pick up a graphics context from the canvas, and if it's a mouse pressed event, I'll do graphics context dot begin pass, and then do graphics context dot move to sketch app message dot the x and the y coordinate. Otherwise, for a mouse dragged event, I'll set the line width to be the one coming from sketch app message, and the stroke to be the color coming also from sketch app message, and I'll do graphics context dot line to, and that will be the x and the y coordinate contained in sketch app message, and then I'll do graphics context dot stroke. So let me go ahead and test this as just a client running without communicating with the server, which I'll be adding shortly. Okay, let's see. Next, let's go to the server, and I'll have a set of connected users. And let me import this javax.websocket, and I'll have this handle open method annotated with onOpen. So this method will be called once a WebSocket connection has been established and a session is created. Now when a WebSocket endpoint receive a message, the method annotated with the onMessage method, with the onMessage annotation, will be called. So I'll have this method handle message annotated with the onMessage annotation. and the type of message received is sketch app message. So what we'll do here is I'll go through all the connected users and do for each of them, and actually first let me instantiate a new sketch app message. So this will be based on the message that was received. So it has the sketch app message dot get point and get color and get size and get event. So I'll go through all the sessions, and if the session that we're currently going through is different than this session, then I'll send it the new message, so new sketch app message. Next, let's go to the encoder. So sketch app message encoder, and in the encode method what's going in is a sketch app message, and what's coming out is a string. Let me rename this one. So I'll define a string type, and if the sketch app message, the event, is a mouse pressed event, then I'll set that type to mouse pressed. Otherwise, if it is mouse dragged, I'll set it to mouse dragged. And I'll define a return string and return it. So the return string is gonna be made up of so x, which would be the x coordinate, and y, which would be the y coordinate, and then these three representing the colors and the size. And so the size, for example, if for erasing it's 30, and for sketching it was 5, and the event type, which could be either mouse pressed or mouse dragged. Then I'll call build on it and do the toString and return it. Next, let's go to the sketch app message decoder. So here in the decode method, what's going in is a string, and what's coming out is a sketch app message. But first we want to find out if it will decode. So I'll have this flag and initially set it to true, and then use JSON.create reader and let's change this to message. So JSON.create reader and instantiate a new string reader, passing in the message, and try to read this JSON, and if successful, then the flag would stay true and return. Otherwise, the flag would be set to false before returning it. Now here in the decode method, let me first have an event type and initialize it to mouse pressed, and I will read the JSON string. So I'll use a JSON object, do JSON.createReader and pass it a string reader, passing to that the message, and then do read object. And from that JSON string, I'll populate a point and a color, and to do that I'll use the three colors that were passed and create one color out of them. And I'll also populate the size, and so here I initialize the event type to be mouse pressed, and then here otherwise if it is not mouse pressed, so if JSON object.getString event type is mouse dragged, I'll set that event type to mouse dragged, and I'll return a new instance of sketch app message made up of those values that we picked up here. So point, color, size, and event type. Now here let me define a session and the JavaFX sketch app. And the constructor would take a JavaFX sketch app instance and set this value, and I'll set the session in the handle open method that is annotated with the onOpen annotation, and this method will handle the errors. So I annotated with onError, and this method will handle incoming messages from the server. And I'll define this send message method for sending messages. So it will use this session and call get basic remote and send object on it, sending it the sketch app message. And let me define this connect method that would initiate a connection to the server, and let's return null for now. I'll come back and code this one, but first let's go back to the JavaFX sketch app. Let's go ahead and define this and add this method connect to server, which picks up a new instance for sketch app client using sketch app client .connect, the static method. and from the start method I can call this connect to server method. So after showing the window, I'll do the connect to server, and in the point sketch method, after doing message sketch, so after sketching on the client, I'll send a message to the server so that it's sketched on the other clients that are connected. And now going to the static method, sketch app client connect. I will start by instantiating a sketch app client, passing in the Java FX sketch app instance, and then I'll do a container provider dot get WebSocket container dot connect to server, and I'll pass it the sketch app client instance and the server path, the URI server path. And when calling this connect to server method, I want to catch those exceptions and handle them. So for connect to server here, I'll do a try catch block. And let's do window and do show view and servers, and let's start this server. Let's see if we can add. Restart it. Okay, so started and synchronized. And let's make sure it's okay. So it's still added. So I can go to the JavaFX sketch app and run as and Java application, and it will throw those exceptions. And this one has to do with julie.logging.log factory. So let's fix this one. So let's go to properties, right click and properties, and let's go to Java build path and libraries and add external jar, and I want to add this Tomcat Julie jar. So I have, this is where I have my web server, the bin directory, and let's do OK. And stop the server. And add and remove. Remove it and re-add it. and let's go ahead and run the application. There's one, let's run a second one. Okay, so let's do A, and let's change the color. Let's try to erase. So let's go to the server, and I will add an onError, a method that has an onError annotation. And let's run that again. And another one. And let's see, test. And let's erase it.